Bill Gates said, "I will always choose a lazy person to do a difficult job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it." What's a real-life example of this? Story 1. Start of lockdown, my 9-year-old son was having worksheets emailed to complete at home. One day, left him at the laptop doing his maths while I made some dinner with my 3-year-old daughter. Walked into the living room with his dinner to find him asking the Alexa all of his maths questions. Comments. I wouldn't call that lazy so much as an intelligent use of the technology at hand. Learning and utilizing technology is probably a much better lesson learned than whatever the particular maths problems he was working on. Reply. I take your point, but he was actually doing it in the least efficient way possible. He memorized the equation he needed to ask, say 327 times 8, walked over to Alexa, asked her the equation, walked back to the laptop, walked back to Alexa to ask her again because he'd forgotten the last 2 digits, walk back to the laptop, enter the answer, walk back to Alexa to check it again. He had to keep walking backwards and forwards because he knew it was cheating, so he'd turned the volume down so I wouldn't hear from the next room. So while he thought he was being clever, he was actually taking more time to figure the answer out using the Alexa than it would have taken to do it himself. Plus, of course, there's the fact he was working on a laptop that has a calculator, and a Cortana assistant that does the exact same as Alexa, and he knows how to use both the calculator and Cortana, but still chose to cheat in the least efficient way possible. Story 2. My girlfriend will kill me for this, but fuck it. I hate taking a finished toilet paper roll downstairs to throw it out. Me just leaving the empty roll in the bathroom annoys the crap out of my girlfriend, so I developed this strategy. When there was only a few sheets left, I'd start using sheets from a new roll and leave the old roll with sheets still on it. That way, she'd always be the one to finish the roll and have to take the empty one downstairs. Edit, for people asking why I don't just use the bathroom rubbish bin, we recycle our cardboard. Comments. You're a fucking lunatic, but I like your style. Story 3. Worked as a laborer at a nursery one summer. Daily tasks included manually watering 15,000 plants each day. Put together a back-of-the-napkin plan to build an irrigation system and spent the next few weeks building it with some money from the boss. That system is still running 15 years later and does all the work now. I did automate myself out of the job and had to find another eventually. Couple years later got my engineering degree. I'm convinced engineers are inherently lazy people that will spend a disproportionate effort to make things easier. Story 4. My brother-in-law spent a whole summer trying to figure out how to fix his sagging deck at the lake, which he could in theory crawl under and jack it up. It would have been a tunneling project. It's a 60 by 60 area all long 2 by 6 boards. Massive. I sat there long enough with enough beers in me to come up with the idea of just cutting a square out of the sagging area about 3 foot x 3 feet, jacking it up, then re-screwing down the boards. He paints the thing every spring with a roller anyhow, so it's not like the square cut shows up. He thought I was a genius. I was just lazy. Story 5. When I was in college, I had a job at an Italian fast food place with a reputation for its breadsticks. They came in frozen and needed a bit to thaw, so we'd take a giant 3 by 4 foot aluminum baking sheet, spread them out in a single layer with no spaces, and cover it with a plastic bag, then leave it sit in the walk-in overnight. The next day you'd have to get a pair of tongs and move each stick to a new tray, turning them over, then cover the new tray with the bag and let them sit on racks for a couple of hours before brushing on the garlic butter sauce. This was tedious enough that you'd usually be ready to brush the butter on the first tray as soon as you turned the last tray. I was given this task for the first time one morning and just did not want to deal with it. I realized if I put the second tray upside down on top of the first one, then turned it over and took the first tray out, I got exactly the same results. Blew the boss's mind when I did the 3-hour job in about 15 minutes. I was given a 5 cents per hour raise. Story 6. I was once set to test a certain piece of equipment on a ship. The test involved attaching the unit to a reader, then run loads of command line commands. Then, one would have to make a copy of all the text, copy it into Word and save it as a real crappy looking report. There was hundreds of units, and they needed to be tested several times a year. We did about 20 to 30 a day. It would take several weeks to finish. I didn't know coding at the time, but always wanted to learn it. Within 2 months, I had made a program, even with a GUI, to spot faults with ease, instead of having to actually read the reports. The program could read 3 units at a time, and would automatically create a smooth PDF report and save it on our server, named with serial number and date. The job was now to attach 3 units, then wait for about 3 minutes, detach and attach new ones. Basically 30 seconds work, 3 minutes break. I could now test all units in a day, though I would typically spread it out over a couple more days. When I left the company, I left the program on the test computer. I got an email from an ex-colleague a few months later, saying they were using the program on several ships now. There wasn't any manual for the program, of course, but it was so straightforward that it wasn't needed. Story 7. I was invited to my friend's yearly apple picking. It was a full day of apples and kids, and filling a truck for cider. I'm lazy and suggested we make the process more efficient with tarps on the ground. We managed in 2 hours what historically took all day. We didn't even get to the picnic lunch. Essentially, I ruined apple picking. Story 8. I knew a guy who had a low-level data reporting job. He had several daily, weekly work responsibilities, including a bunch of reports that needed quite a bit of tweaking from raw data to finished product. But like I said, low level. We didn't find out until way later, but he had set up macros for each of his major responsibilities where he could. Once set up, he'd just run the macros to do his work, but then he'd, smartly, hold off on delivering the reports until just a little before the deadlines. He'd hit every assignment and was seen as reliable. He also would complain about the workload so people would leave him with that work. I doubt he did a full hour of work a day after he set up what he did. Eventually, he left the job for one with better pay. But damn, did he work lazy. Also, he was smart not to reveal until the end, because had he told them about it he would have gotten a pat on the back and would have been given a whole other workload, on top of maintaining those macros, etc. Dude milked the job, not the other way around. Story 9. My boss put my name in for leading a project group shortly after I joined the company. I had no experience whatsoever about project managing, yet he still demanded that I lead the group of 12 people. All way smarter guys, tech background and shit. These guys are like magicians for me, and with way more time at the company. I'm a business guy who's too dumb for balance sheets, that's why I'm in HR. And because I quite like the field the most. So we started the first meeting. I asked for everyone's plan, experience and ideas, gathered the different pros and cons, cross-checked with the budget we had, put on a time frame with milestones to reach, around 6 months, put in valuable people to consult at different steps. Why did I do that? Because I like organizing stuff and keep everyone on the same page and delegate to-dos. Got promoted because of the success of the project. I asked my boss why he put me in for it since I never done anything like that. He said because I complained in the first week that most of the work has way too wonky structure, no clear guideline, and this could be improved heavily if we just take some time into it. And because I hated talking to others if I had questions and I wouldn't get a clear answer, like ask 10 people the same question and you get 15 different answers. In the long run this would make us way more efficient and keeps everyone on the same page. All because I hated disorganized work. Story 10. Years ago as a student I got a job stocking shelves. Guys were carrying the heavy boxes, put them on the floor and bend each time to pick up the items to put on the shelves. I was maybe a light 100 pounds woman, and carrying the boxes was just killing me physically. So one day I had an idea. I put the box on her old desk chair and rolled it around. No more carrying and no more bending. Funny thing is that, instead of doing the same thing, most of the guys called me lazy and kept carrying the heavy boxes. Just to prove how strong they were. Now they have special rolling carts to do the job. Story 11. My brother gave my oldest nephew $10 a week if he did all his chores without needing to be told or complaining. One day, he gets home early from work and sees the neighbor kid tossing a bag in the trash. He asks him what he is doing, and the kid says he gets $5 a week to take care of a few chores. My nephew outsourced his chores. Comments. I tried doing that as a kid and got a slap on the back of the head. It was just my dad and I. We both hated doing the dishes, so they would stockpile. It got to the point where he offered to pay me $20 just to do them. Before I got around to it, we went down the road to my aunt's. I ended up offering my cousin $10 if he would come over and do the dishes. He accepted. I wasn't allowed to do that again. Story 12. Well, I worked in a graphics design studio as an intern. They mostly had me practice and do some basic stuff their head designers was too busy to do. One was a real estate ad. It had a few basic templates, but it was all kinds of scatterbrained. I would spend 5 to 10 minutes trying to find the right layer for all the pictures and had to mess with way too much. So I made copies of the files and made one for each template. I labeled everything, made it so the images on top of each other wouldn't clip into the lower ones like the previous did. So on. You could be in and out of the template in 2 to 3 minutes. Showed my boss the difference, and he had this face of well shit. He said the next day that if I was a graduate he'd hire me, because I was better than the people sending applications in. In short, I made an overly complicated, unorganized thing the opposite, and my boss was actually sad he couldn't hire me. Story 13. I worked for the state doing data entry of a sort. We got scans of forms that people had filled out, and we had to go through and make sure the numbers that the computer had pulled from the scan matched what was written, since it wasn't entirely accurate. So, the software we used showed us all the scanned documents and overlaid fields right next to any point where the scanner found numbers, with a number the machine determined was written already in the field. The job was essentially looking at each field and making sure the number right next to it was the same. If it wasn't, fix it. We didn't fuck with any of the text, it was just the numbers. Now, these scans included all of the paperwork submitted by each person, including like a dozen pages with no data whatsoever. It was just the beginning of the document that the person read before they filled out the actual forms and stuff. There was also a section just after the middle that was several more pages of information for the person. My trainer showed me how to do all this. He accepted a new document from the queue and pressed the down arrow key to scroll through the beginning section until he got to the first field. He made sure the numbers matched and repeated this process for several minutes, before excusing himself and telling me I could come grab him if I had any questions. I sat down at the computer and took a look around the room. Literally every screen I could see from where I was sitting, people were actively scrolling. Some were using mouse wheel, most used the down arrow. I accepted a new document from the queue, and I pushed the tab button. The program instantly brought me to the first field a dozen pages down. I smirked to myself, compared the field to the written text, and repeated that process instead. I did go back and scroll through that first document to ensure I hadn't missed anything due to a goof in the software or anything like that. Near the end of my second day, I was called into my boss's office and asked what I'd been doing the past 2 days. Turns out, as of day 2, I was churning through 5 or 6 times the amount of documents a day compared to people who'd been working there for years. My boss assumed I was just clicking through new documents without doing any work and was very much acting like he had caught me red-handed. I asked if they reviewed the documents I finished to ensure that I'd done the work. He replied that they hadn't, but it was obviously impossible to go through that many pages in the time it took me to do it. I told him that I knew for a fact that if he went through any of my work, he'd see everything was fine. He pulled one of my finished documents at random and spent several minutes scrolling through it, shaking his head to himself, staring daggers at the screen. He admitted that this document was fine, but it would take hours for his assistant manager to review all my work. "Can I show you something? Could you please pull up another random document of mine?" He rolled his eyes, but he did it. I stood up from my chair, came around the desk, and I hit tab. He was looking at the screen like it was witchcraft. I showed him the field matched, and tabbed my way through the rest of the fields, confirming the rest of the numbers as I did. I finished reviewing the whole document with him in less than a minute. He asked me if my trainer showed me that. I replied that he hadn't, but it was a universal keyboard shortcut that I'd been using since the early 90s. This happened in 2013, by the way. He just looked at me for a bit and then said he had to talk to his assistant manager about the whole thing, before asking me to go back to work. Later, I'm heading out at the end of the day when my boss asks me to come over to his office. He fires me for not taking the job seriously and potentially causing delays to taxpayers due to inaccuracies. I actually laughed at him after he got done with his spiel. And that's the story of how I managed to flummox several state employees with a highly controversial use of the tab button. Still blows my mind. Story 14. In 1927, my grandfather started his new job at DuPont on a Friday. His first assignment was to separate out a chemical that was suspended in another chemical. He was handed a beaker of the stuff to work on. Since it was late on a Friday afternoon, he did nothing with it, just stuck it on a shelf and went home. He came back Monday morning to discover that the chemical had precipitated out and was sitting on the bottom of the beaker. He showed this to his new boss, who decided my grandfather was a genius. This process, doing nothing to the suspension, became the first of my grandfather's 47 patents. Story 15. At my last job, a truck suspension shop, we did inventory every December, and it was someone's job to count all the washers and screws of every size. It was my first inventory, and I casually mentioned that they should just weigh 10 screws or washers, then weigh them all and divide the weight to get the count. Everyone looked at me like I had given them the key to the universe. Counting washers and screws went from a day or two to just an hour. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.